The rain had started before the sun had fully risen, and now, across the gray slopes of Swan Mountain, it was no longer a scattered drizzle, but had become a thick wall of water, pouring down as if the sky had cracked open and was spilling out all its sorrow. Wind howled through the old pine branches, snaking through every crevice along the narrow mountain road, bringing with it waves of biting cold that mingled with the drumbeat of raindrops on the ambulance roof, a rhythm that felt like a distant omen. Inside the silver-white ambulance, Casey Rhodes gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if holding on to the last anchor in a world that was collapsing all around her. She hadn't feared rain since the last time, but something about today's downpour left her unsettled. It wasn't the weather itself, but the strange quietness in the sound of the rain, the emptiness behind each streak of water sliding down the windshield, as if everything she saw was only the mask of something else, something deeper and sadder, waiting to be revealed. Jeremy Parrish, her patient and calm partner, sat in the passenger seat, eyes fixed on the navigation device. Inside the vehicle, the only sound was the faint warmth of the heater fogging up the windows, interspersed with the slow sweep of the wipers across the relentless rain. "No new signals from dispatch," Jeremy said, his voice even, but Casey only nodded in response. She never liked the unclear emergency calls, locations with just coordinates, no names, no descriptions, just a dot deep in the woods. There was always something invisible about those calls, something that felt less like a simple rescue and more like echoes from the edge of memory that someone, or something, was desperately trying to send. And then, just as they rounded a tight corner, where the headlights pierced through the dense rain and cast shimmering light across the mirror-slick asphalt, Casey saw it. Not large, not small, not trembling or shrinking back like lost dogs often did. It stood in the middle of the road, soaked, motionless, facing the headlights without flinching. A German shepherd. Back straight, head held high, its black and gold coat glistening in the headlights like the outline of a statue sculpted from rain. But it wasn't the dog's presence that made Casey's foot freeze on the gas. It was its eyes. That gaze fixed directly on her. No fear, no retreat, none of the wild aggression animals sometimes show. Instead, it was a silent, profound look, as if this creature knew her, or worse, had been waiting for her all along. There was no barking, no unnecessary movement, just pure silence amid the storm, as if the world had faded into a blur, and this dog, the dog, was the only thing reality still clung to. "Casey, honk the horn," Jeremy said, frowning slightly. "It's just a stray dog." But Casey kept her hands on the wheel, eyes locked on the figure ahead. In that moment, she no longer felt like she was driving to an emergency scene. She felt adrift in some distant dream, a place she had once met this gaze, a place she had lost something she still couldn't name. Then a bolt of lightning tore across the sky, illuminating everything for a single breath. In that blinding white flash, Casey saw something hanging around the dog's neck. Not a leash, but a gray, scorched piece of fabric, soaked through yet still faintly bearing the shape of a rescue insignia, like the kind found on firefighter uniforms. Her heart skipped half a beat. This wasn't a lost dog. This was a dog that had belonged somewhere, to someone, to a purpose. And now it stood here, in the rain, to do something once again. Suddenly the dog turned its head. It didn't run. It didn't disappear. With calm, almost solemn steps, it walked to the edge of the forest, where the darkness beneath the trees swallowed its drenched form as if it were part of the wild itself. But before it vanished from the headlights, it paused, turning to look back just once. That gaze, still steady, but now unmistakably beckoning. "Wait," Casey whispered, almost to herself, and pushed open the car door. Wind and rain crashed in, cold slicing right through her skin, but she didn't stop. The moment her feet touched the slick road, she knew. This was not an ordinary mission. She wasn't going to save someone. She was going because a loyal soul was calling her with everything it effort left. A look, a memory, and an unkept promise. The rain fell heavier, and the dog was still waiting. She stepped into the rain, and the dog began to move. Not hurried, not rushed. Its steps were light but certain, as if it had walked this path hundreds of times in the dark, beneath whispering branches and over the soft, wet earth. Casey followed, step by step, her eyes never leaving the dark figure ahead, now her only anchor in the foggy world. Rain poured onto her shoulders, seeped into her collar, plastering her jacket to her skin like an icy shell. But Casey felt nothing except the steady presence in front of her, the silent, purposeful gait, as if the dog was leading her back to a part of the world she had long forgotten, the place where instinct and memory meet, where it is not humans who save animals, but animals who help recover what is left in humans. Around the dog's neck, the object she'd seen in the lightning flash was now clearer as it passed through an open patch of woods. A silver scrap of fabric, charred at the edge, frayed threads swaying in the wind and rain like a relic of the past. Almost instinctively, Casey squinted to see better, and though the rain blurred everything, she made out the faded imprint of a badge. Not complete, but part of the letters remained. Fire R, and a smudged flame inside a small shield. Her heart tightened in her chest. Not a stray, not an ownerless wanderer. This had been a fire rescue dog, a Kylant stick, a warrior. Kota. She didn't know his name, but in her heart she called him that. Never looked back, never checked if she was following. And strangely, that didn't worry her, because that earlier look had been enough. He knew she would come. Not from fear or curiosity, but because something invisible had been knotted between them in that single, silent moment in the rain. A bond formed from trust that needed no words. "Casey, what are you doing?" Jeremy's voice called after her, muffled by rain pounding the roof. "Come back. It's just a dog. We have a job to do." But Casey kept walking. She couldn't explain why. She just knew that each of Kota's steps seemed guided by a clear purpose. Not every dog would walk through the woods in a storm, much less lead someone. He was leading and leading anyone sensitive enough to listen. And strangely, for the first time in years, Casey felt herself being called. Not by radio, not by an emergency signal, but by a voice no one else could hear. The call of a life that once belonged to a mission. They passed trees shrouded in lichen, roots pushing up like old fingers gripping the wet ground. Jeremy's flashlight swept across the leaves, reflecting off every raindrop. But Casey didn't need the light. She just kept her eyes on Kota's back, soaked but steady, still carrying the bearing of a soldier who never abandons his post. Every slight shake of his head, every brief pause before moving on, felt like a silent reminder. Hurry, there's still time. No one had ever taught her how to trust a dog, but she used to trust. Trust in glances that needed no translation, in actions that needed no explanation. And now, in the woods, in the rain, Casey knew. What was waiting at the end of this path wasn't a trick of fate. It was something important, fragile, and in need of rescue. Ahead, Kota stopped. His silhouette stood out against the dark leaves, a strange marker in the woods. He turned his head, slowly, and this time, his eyes met hers again. No urgency, just a look that seemed to hold back something almost like a plea. Casey clenched her fist. Her heart beat faster. In the rain, she realized, he wasn't just leading the way. He was giving back something humanity had lost, the courage to trust nameless signs. In the end, Jeremy gave in to Casey's stubbornness and the strange instinct sparked by the dog's eyes. He reached for the flashlight in the toolbox, pulled a raincoat over his head, and hurried after them, his feet splashing through freezing water. The flashlight cut a long beam of light, flickering at times, glinting off wet leaves, providing just enough illumination to see the path ahead. but not enough to dispel the feeling that they were stepping into somewhere beyond the edge of reality. Kota led them across the forest's edge, where the old, towering trees stood like pillars holding up the sky, silently bearing the endless, steady rain. Underfoot, the ground was waterlogged, small mud pits lurking beneath layers of rotting leaves, ready to swallow an unwary step. Casey felt the cold mud seeping through her clothes, her pants growing heavier with every step. But she didn't stop, because ahead of her, though all she could see was a silent shape, every movement Kota made radiated a strange certainty, as if he knew every bump in the trail, every dry shortcut, every patch that would slip if you stepped wrong. Kota didn't move like a typical guide dog. He never raced ahead too far, nor did he disappear quietly as if to hide. On the contrary, he stopped frequently, glancing back at them, ears pricked and alert, eyes measuring their every step. If Casey fell behind, he slowed down. If Jeremy got caught in a branch, Kota stopped completely, waiting. No need for a call. No need for a command. He adjusted himself like a seasoned soldier guiding his team through dangerous territory. The rain kept falling, as steady as a heartbeat, as relentless as the memories Casey had folded away and hidden long ago. Today's rain wasn't a violent flood meant to wash everything away. Instead, it clung, persistent, seeping cold, like it didn't want to erase the pain but rather submerge it, forcing people to confront and feel it, only then allowing them to move forward. "This is strange," Jeremy spoke up, trying to steady his breath. "I've worked with K9s on rescue teams before, in Missoula, but this one he's different." Casey didn't answer. She knew Jeremy was right. Kota was different, not just because of his size, though he was taller than average, his muscles tense even as he stood soaked, but because of the way he moved. Not like an animal trained to obey, but like an independent spirit, still carrying a mission unfinished. "Did you see the badge around his neck?" Casey whispered as they paused on flat ground between two large trees. "It's not a collar. It's part of a firefighter's uniform." Jeremy looked up at Kota, now standing a few steps away, his soaked body steady, eyes alert as if he was listening to something only he could hear in the forest. Jeremy nodded, his face changing. Not skeptical now, but tinged with caution and respect. "Then he has a reason to come back here," Jeremy said. "And we need to know what it is." They moved on, this time more silent, more careful, as if realizing the forest was no longer just a place, but a forgotten room in memory, where a living creature was opening the door, inviting them to enter. Kota led them down a low path where wild grass lay flattened and fallen, rotten trees littered the ground like evidence of some old storm. Each time the flashlight swept past, Casey caught sight of small paw prints, sharp claws pressed into the soft mud, evenly spaced, deep and straight, proof that this dog wasn't running away, but working. And she began to understand. The path Kota led them on was not a random trek through the rain, but a route chosen with intent. Every step Kota took was a mark, drawing an unspoken message. "I will not leave. I have something left to do, and I need humans to arrive in time." No one spoke. Even the rain seemed to fall less heavily now, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Up ahead, Kota's silhouette stopped again. This time he didn't look back. He stood perfectly still, body tense, ears high, as if sensing something humans could not. Casey gripped the flashlight tightly. The water beneath her feet was receding. They were coming to a sunken patch, hidden deep among the trees. She had no idea what was waiting ahead. But Kota knew, and he was still waiting. Casey knelt at the edge of the hollow, where rainwater had pooled into a thick, muddy sludge, heavy with the musty scent of old leaves and black earth, long undisturbed. Kota stood at the rim, head tilted, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the ground as if pointing the way, as if every raindrop falling now was knocking on the door of something buried. Then he whined, a sound that wasn't loud or sharp, but deep and raspy, as if pulled from a tired chest, a whisper caught between exhaustion and final hope. He stepped back a few paces, nose still pointing at the dip in the ground, tail lowered, not in fear, but in deference, making way, entrusting the rescue of what he had guarded all this time to the humans. Casey didn't hesitate. She slid her knees into the soft mud, her bare hands clawing at the mix of dirt and water. Her freezing fingers could no longer tell skin from soil, only that something beneath it all was waiting to be found. Something alive, or once alive, not yet ready to be forgotten. Jeremy paused, frozen at the sight before him, as if stepping into a page of history no one dared open. But then, just like Casey, he knelt. No questions, no need for reasons, just knowing that the four-legged soldier, had given them an unspoken mission. He clamped the flashlight under his chin, digging with Casey, lifting away layers of soaked leaves, until they uncovered something soft, thick, and heavy. Canvas. A familiar kind. Water-resistant, thick-stitched, often seen in old uniforms or field equipment. Casey tugged at a corner, and a carrying strap appeared, then a sturdy plastic buckle, and then a shape emerged. A baby carrier, scratched, faded, but still whole. She swallowed hard, her hands shaking as she touched the ice-cold fabric, as if the whole forest was holding its breath with them. When Casey gently pulled back the cover, a patch of pink cloth appeared, wrinkled, drenched, and underneath it, a small, pale, motionless face. The baby's skin was white as paper, lips tinged blue, eyes closed as if sleeping in a deep, frozen dream. On her wrist, a plastic hospital band still clung tight, letters faint but legible. June Monroe. "Oh, God," Jeremy whispered, his voice lost in the rain. Casey said nothing. She leaned close, pressing her finger to the tiny chest. Nothing. She put her ear down, rain falling on her neck, cold water seeping in. And then a breath. So faint, so fragile, she froze in place, barely detectable, but it was there, a thread dangling between life and death, so weak a single blink might have broken it. "Jeremy!" Casey shot upright, her voice choked but firm. "Alive! She's alive!" He moved instantly, pulling the infant resuscitation kit from his pack, while Jeremy checked the heartbeat, set up the tiny oxygen tank, and prepared the thermal blanket. Casey tore off her jacket, wrapped the baby, and pulled her close. She bent her head and whispered something no one could hear. Maybe a prayer. Maybe a silent promise. Her breath warmed the baby's frozen cheek, trembling but steady. Kota now sat a few yards behind them. He never took his eyes off June. The rain kept falling on his drenched fur, drops sliding down his nose, his neck, hitting the earth like the tears of a powerless but faithful witness. And it was then that Casey realized Kota had been here the whole time, through all the hours of rain, wind, and cold. He'd stayed there, guarding the baby from being swept away by water, from wild animals, from the cold that could have stilled her heart. No orders, no audience, no reward, just Kota and the child. "How did he know?" Jeremy murmured, as if asking himself. "How does a dog know to protect a baby like that?" Casey didn't answer. She knew some things were beyond training, beyond instinct. They are memories, loyalty, what remains in a creature that once lived for a purpose and doesn't know how to exist without it. She bent her head, touching her forehead to the baby's, eyes closed. A faint warmth spread from her body to that fragile life, a whisper between two heartbeats. "You're not alone. I'm here, and he's never left your side." For a moment, Casey looked up and met Kota's eyes. There was nothing left to say. Only silent gratitude, so deep it needed no words. And Kota seemed to understand, tilting his head, breathing out a long sigh, then sitting still, waiting until the humans had finished their work. Because for him, this rescue had begun long before they arrived, and it would only truly end when the baby was safe in human arms. June lay in Casey's arms, so small it seemed the whole world could fit into a single hand. Her delicate skin was still damp and cold, her breath faint as a thread, fluttering with each trembling beat, as if she wasn't sure she had permission to keep existing in this world. Casey pulled the baby closer, holding her as if reclaiming something she had long lost. A tiny life, a chance at redemption, a heartbeat that needed to be kept alive beneath the relentless rain pouring down from above. Jeremy had already taken the neonatal emergency kit from his backpack, his hands working quickly but never rushing, as if the child's life was so fragile that any unnecessary movement might break it. He opened the portable oxygen tank, carefully fitting the tiny mask to the baby's wrinkled face, then wrapped her in a thermal blanket. Everything happened in silence, broken only by the sound of rain and the choked, heavy breaths of two adults struggling not to let their hearts shatter from emotion. And all that time, Kota never took his eyes off June. He sat at the edge of the hollow, posture straight as a sentinel. His dark eyes tracked every breath, every movement the baby made, as if personally ensuring that everything was still right, just as he had guarded for hours, maybe the entire stormy night. His soaked fur clung to his muscular frame, rain pounding on his back and head, drops dripping from the tip of his nose to the ground like a ticking clock. But Kota never budged. How long had he sat there? An hour? 2? All night? No one knew. But one thing was certain. He would not leave until someone came to take over this responsibility from him. And now, even as the humans began to take charge, he still didn't let down his guard. Like a temporary father, like a warrior who would not abandon his post until utterly certain that the life he protected was safe. Casey looked up at Kota, and in the moment their eyes met, something wordless passed between them. Not language, but a primal empathy, something that crossed all boundaries between human and animal. It was the look of a being trained to step into danger, and who kept stepping in even when there was no one left to give orders. "How long did you keep her safe?" Casey whispered, not expecting an answer. But Kota, as if he heard, tilted his head, then looked again at June. His gaze steady, a silent affirmation that he would not leave, not for rain, not for cold, not for despair. He stayed because the baby needed him. Jeremy's voice was soft but taut. "Heart rate's stabilizing. Oxygen's rising, still weak. But she's responding." He glanced at Casey. "We need to get her back to the station now. She needs warming and a full check." Casey nodded, but didn't stand up yet. She looked at June. The baby had started to stir slightly under the thermal blanket, her lips no longer a deep blue, but turning a pale pink, like a plum blossom in the spring rain. A faint sound, as weak as the wind in the leaves, escaped the baby's tiny chest, a breath, alive, no longer trembling. She's alive. That thought echoed in Casey's mind like a quiet prayer, and with every repetition, a part of her seemed to be unlocked, as if she hadn't only saved a child, but also rescued a part of herself she thought had died in that fire years ago. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since leaving the ambulance, she felt the air, cold and damp though it was, carried something real and light. Hope. She gathered June up, swaddling her tightly in the jacket and blanket, and stepped out of the hollow. Passing Kota, she paused, bending down slightly. No words of thanks, no pat on the head, just a long, deep look, an unspoken acceptance. "You're part of this life, and you just saved it, in a way none of us could." Kota responded with a sigh, not of exhaustion, but almost of relief. Then he rose, following quietly behind, not crowding, not asking to come along, just keeping the right distance, like a guardian who has handed over his charge, but still watches until all is safe. The rain still hadn't stopped, but now it was no longer a wall dividing them, but a thin veil, behind which life had just been pulled back from the brink, not by luck, but by the silent loyalty of a dog who refused to turn away. The rain lashed down in fury, beating waves on the ambulance roof, creating a relentless, mournful music of nature's wrath. On the windshield, the drops stretched into streaks, swept away without mercy by the wipers, slow and weary as if tired from working too long. In the foggy cab, Casey sat motionless as a statue, holding the child close against her chest, her thick jacket soaked but wrapped tightly, the last cocoon of warmth she could offer in this moment. June was swallowed up in her embrace, so tiny she seemed to disappear between the woman's heartbeat and breath. Her body was still cold, her tiny hands unmoving, but her chest rose and fell. Weak, fragile, but real. Every breath was a slender thread tying her life to this world. And Casey, through all she had lost, knew, as long as that thread trembled, she would not let go. Jeremy glanced in the rearview mirror, his voice hoarse with emotion and tension. Heartbeat steady, skin's turning pink. She's fighting. Casey didn't reply. She leaned to block the draft from a cracked window. Her whole body shivered, not just from cold, but from something deeper, a sense of coming alive as her heart touched another life once again. She had thought she'd lost the faith to keep anyone alive. But in these arms around this child, something primal returned, a pure instinct, like motherhood, needing no blood bond to understand. A flash of lightning split the gray sky, briefly illuminating the woods behind them, where only minutes before, a drenched, ragged but resolute German shepherd had led them to the very place where life waited for rescue. Casey looked up, searching for that familiar silhouette. Upright ears, those knowing, soulful eyes. But there was nothing. Kota was gone. No footsteps, no tracks, not even a shadow lingering in the trees. All that remained was a space in the rain. Silent, sacred, as if nature itself had sent Kota, then gently taken him away once his mission was complete. Jeremy pressed the accelerator, tires slipping in the mud before finding their grip again. He leaned over, speaking just to keep them both awake. We're 10 minutes from Greystone Hollow. The clinic has warming beds and heaters. She'll be okay. She has to be. Casey squeezed the child a little tighter. June didn't cry, but the way her tiny lashes trembled, the way her little nostrils fluttered, showed that somewhere in her was a strange resolve, a determination with no language, but as clear as the rain falling outside. She turned to Jeremy, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Do you think she'll remember any of this? The dog? Jeremy was silent for a moment, then offered a sad smile. No, but she'll carry it with her, always. She doesn't have to remember. Things like this live in your blood, in the way she'll look at rain, in the way she'll love dogs without knowing why. The ambulance rolled past a faded wooden sign. Welcome to Greystone Hollow. The clinic's dim yellow lights glowed through the rain-soaked trees. Casey bowed her head, pressing her cheek gently to June's forehead, whispering something soft and indistinct. A prayer for a life beginning on the strangest of paths, through forest, through mud, through loneliness, and guided by a wordless soul. And in that moment, even as her body stayed cold, wet, and trembling, Casey felt her heart quietly warm. Not because she had saved someone, but because, at last, she could believe. There are creatures born just to carry the light for others, even if they walk alone through the dark. Kota had vanished as if he'd never existed, but his footprints remained. In Casey's heart, in her arms wrapped around June, clear and indelible, impossible to erase. The noisy sound of rain pounding on the tin roof of Greystone Hollow's clinic played like an endless song, sometimes fierce, sometimes quiet, but never stopping. Raindrops slid down the window pane, breaking into countless streaks as they caught the cold glow of the fluorescent lights inside. That space, a tiny clinic lost in the rain-soaked mountains, had become the final refuge for the most fragile thing of the night. A life that had never known the world, never called anyone's name, and had never been called by anyone, until now. Casey stood silently beside the neonatal warming bed, her body still soaked from the rain that hadn't yet let up. Her coat was off, her warming scarf now folded as a pillow under the baby's head. Damp hair hung over her brow, and her eyes that had once closed themselves off from anything beautiful after her sister's death, now watched every breath of the little girl lying beneath the blankets. The baby didn't cry, didn't flail. She only breathed, and that alone was enough to make Casey's heart feel like it might break with relief. "Temperature's rising 95.6 degrees now," muttered Dr. Ellen Wexley, not looking up, her hands steadily checking the baby's vital signs on the monitor. She was a woman in her 60s, with a tough build, as if she'd been carved from the granite of the Swan Range itself. Yet in every movement, from the gentle way she wiped the child's brow to the way she lowered the lamp so it wouldn't shine in the baby's eyes, there lingered a softness, as if she had once lost, once suffered, and now, in her way, was giving that tenderness back to someone else. Ellen carefully removed the wet cloth from the baby's wrist, her eyes narrowing as she found something beneath. It was a plastic hospital band, blurred by rain, the printed letters almost gone, except for one word that remained: June. No one said a word. The room fell into a hush, not from exhaustion, but from a silent agreement. June. That name was more than a clue. It was proof that this child was not forgotten from birth, that somewhere, someone had once held her, whispered that name into her ear, and believed she would have a future. Jeremy, still drying his hands, spoke in a low voice. At least someone gave her a name. The world isn't entirely silent. Casey didn't take her eyes off June. She sat down, both hands resting gently on the edge of the warming bed, her breath sinking with the steady hum of the machines. No one replied. They didn't need to. The child's presence, her life, was the only answer. Ellen tilted her head, asking, "This little one? You said a dog led you here?" Jeremy nodded, glancing toward the window. "A German shepherd. Big, but not aggressive. He stood in the road, then walked away. Led us. Never barked." Ellen frowned. "Did he have a collar?" Casey shook her head. But then she paused, remembering. "Yes, a small badge was signed. I couldn't read the words, but it had a history." The doctor said nothing more. She only quietly stroked June's hair, murmuring to herself, "Some dogs aren't born to be pets, but to be witnesses, to cross human lives and leave a punctuation mark where others thought things had ended." Casey stood and walked to the window. The rain was still thick, each drop tapping against the glass like endless whispers. Outside was darkness, the wet forest she'd never want to face alone. But something in her heart was stirring. "No one's reported a missing baby?" she asked, turning back to Ellen. "No one yet. No calls, no records, no signs of family, and no one's asked about a lost dog in the rain," Jeremy quietly added. "The only thing that brought us here vanished like it had never existed." All three fell silent. And in that silence, from the warming bed, came a soft breath, a sound that made all of them turn. June shifted slightly. Her lips parted. A tiny hiccup, like the very first sound of a soul touching the border of the human world. Casey smiled. Her first real smile in years, one not born of politeness. She bent down, touching the baby's wrist, where the band still clung, the faded letters spelling June. And in that moment she thought, maybe, just maybe, Kota had known the child's name before any of them, that he'd come out of the rain-soaked forest, not out of instinct, but for a purpose, a mission that no one assigned, but no one else could fulfill. A dog, a name, a life, and a story that was only just beginning. When Casey returned home at dawn, the rain had softened, falling in gentle waves that never quite stopped. Her footsteps on the wet wooden porch sounded like someone walking across a freshly awakened memory. The warmth of the small life named June still lingered inside her. But above all, the strange silhouette of the German shepherd who had appeared from another world. She tossed her soaked jacket over the back of a chair, her cold hands reaching for her phone. A moment's hesitation. Then she opened the photo, the only one she'd managed to take by the ambulance, just before Kota vanished. In the picture, Kota stands at the forest's edge, mud and rain clinging to his paws. His dark fur is drenched, but his eyes are startlingly clear. A gaze that holds no fear, no pleading, no need for explanation. Just pure presence and an unspoken message. Casey zoomed in. Amid the dirty, mud-stained collar, a small, singed badge dangled, as if it had once been part of something very old, very deep. She logged into Red Elk Community, the local network where people posted about lost dogs, missing cars, or a sunset so beautiful it stunned everyone after a storm. Besides a photo of an injured owl and a post about a collapsed bridge, Casey created a new thread. "Does anyone recognize this dog? Tonight, he led us to an abandoned newborn in the forest," and then disappeared. Attached was the photo. Kota, soaked in the rain, standing silent as a ghost in the real world. She didn't expect much. Part of her still wondered if she was imagining things. It had all happened so fast, so quietly, like a dream dissolving. But only 10 minutes later, the first notification popped up. "This dog was on the Monroe Bridge last month. I remember because it was pouring rain, and he stood alone on the bridge looking down at the river." Someone else replied immediately. "I saw him near the East Trail. He walked beside my car for a while, then stopped and stared at me like he wanted me to understand something. When I got out, he was gone." An elderly woman shared. "I swear it was he who led me to my husband's accident last year. I was searching for him in the rain after his last call. The dog ran past the fence, barked, and ran ahead. I followed, and there he was, unconscious by the creek." Dozens of comments appeared, each one like a piece of a larger puzzle, an invisible map of mysterious appearances. No one knew his name, no one knew his origin. All anyone could offer was the same description. A German shepherd, silent, standing in the rain. No barking, never touching anyone. Just guiding, then vanishing. But then, one comment made Casey catch her breath. "His name is Kota, canine search and rescue dog from Red Elk. Missing since the Ridge Fire in 2019. No one's seen him since." Casey immediately clicked on the commenter's profile. Ivy Lang, a middle-aged woman with an owl perched on her shoulder, and eyes as calm as an old forest. Her bio was simple. Former wildlife rescue worker. The Ridge Fire still burns in memory. Casey didn't hesitate. She sent a short message. "I think I just met Kota." The reply came within minutes, as if the other woman had been waiting. "I need to hear everything." So they began to talk about the photo, about finding June, about all the strange signs that science couldn't explain. Ivy shared that Kota had once been the best dog on the team, specializing in finding the missing, especially babies. Kota could detect the faintest breath under rubble, could hold his post for 3 days and nights during a forest search. Then, after his handler's funeral, firefighter Travis Hull, Kota disappeared. No one knew why. Some said Kota went looking for Travis. Some said he left because he couldn't bear the emptiness. But after that, strange stories began to spread. Kota seen at accident sites, then gone again. Casey read all this with quiet tears. A dog, thought forgotten, was still out there, silently fulfilling his mission alone in the rain. She looked out the window. Dawn hadn't yet broken. Out there, somewhere in the wet forest, Kota might be sitting, still watching over something about to happen. Not because he'd been given an order, but his loyalty never faded. A dog, a name, a spirit that never lost its way. And that night, Casey didn't sleep, because she knew this story was only just beginning. That afternoon, as the rain began to ease, the atmosphere at Greystone Hollow Medical Clinic became strangely subdued. The steady beeping of June's heart monitor still echoed, but in the hallway, everyone seemed to walk more slowly and speak more softly, as if the building itself was sheltering something too fragile to wake. Casey leaned against the window frame, holding a cup of cold coffee. She didn't drink it, just borrowed its fading warmth to push back the chill seeping into her skin. But what sent a shiver down her spine wasn't the cold air, but what had arrived in her inbox that morning. A message from a woman named Ivy Lang. "I know, Coda. Do you have time to talk? I'm on my way." No greeting, no introduction, no need for explanation. Just a silent confirmation, yet enough to unsettle Casey ever since. Then, around early afternoon, the glass doors slid open. A breath of air, smelling of wet leaves and forest earth, swept in. Casey looked up, and she entered. A woman carrying the presence of the mountains, of fire scars, and of memories not yet named. Ivy Lang, in person, was nothing like a mere online commenter. She was tall, her shoulders thin, but her stance as straight as a pine after winter. Her silver hair was tied into a long braid over one shoulder, her gray-blue eyes cold as river stones but not closed off. She wore a moss-green wool coat, damp with rain, and mud-caked boots. When she removed her hood, her hair was beaded with water but never disheveled, as if wind and rain were old friends. "Casey?" she asked, her voice rough, not deep, but every word weighed like tree roots. "Yes, you're Ivy?" Casey stepped forward, almost shivering. "You're the one who posted the photo." Ivy didn't ask, just stated it, as if confirming something self-evident. I recognized those eyes immediately, even after all these years. I couldn't mistake them. Casey invited her into the break room in the back, an old wooden table, a small map of Greystone on the wall, and a battered chair once used for IV drips for the very ill. "You know Kota?" Casey began, still carrying a trace of doubt, or maybe a hope needing confirmation. Ivy was silent for a few seconds, then reached into her coat and pulled out an old, yellowed photo. The corner creased. "This is Travis Holt," she said, her hand resting on the picture as if afraid to wrinkle the past further. "And this is Kota, at 2 years old, the day he officially joined the Red Elk Rescue Team." In the photo was a young firefighter, hair slightly curled, bright eyes, and a smile big enough to light up an entire station. Pressed close beside him was Kota, still young, his fur sleek, ears pricked, and his eyes wide, ready to leap into any fire as long as there was a human to save. "Travis was one of the best," Ivy said, "and Kota was more than just his dog. He was a friend, a partner, a second soul." Then she told the story of the Ridge Fire in 2019, a fierce wildfire that swept uncontrollably across the western forests. Travis and Kota were sent in with Team 28. The wind shifted and beams collapsed. Travis managed to push 2 people out of danger but didn't make it himself. When the rescue team arrived, they found him gone. And Kota sat by his handler's body, unmoving, like a statue carved from coal. "We had to use tranquilizers to get him away," Ivy whispered. "He wouldn't leave, didn't whine, didn't eat, didn't look at anyone. He just sat there beside his person for 8 hours. After the funeral, Kota was sent to a temporary training unit. But 3 days later, he vanished without a trace. There were no signs of a breakout. The fencing was untouched, everything eerily tidy." Ivy's voice was slow, as if she were still haunted by the way Kota left. "We searched for months," Ivy murmured, "but no one ever saw him again. Until now." Casey was speechless. Suddenly, all the fragments she thought were random began to fit together as if by fate. The way Kota never barked, only waited. Those eyes that seemed to already know what was coming. The way he led them like a soldier familiar with every path through life and death. "Why do you think he came back now?" Casey asked, though deep down she was already starting to understand. Ivy looked out the window, where rainwater still clung to the trees. "Maybe," she answered, "because for the first time since Travis died, a child needed him. And Kota, even if the world forgot his name, never forgot what he was born to do." A long silence followed, not heavy, but full of respect, as if both women, a survivor and a returnee, were listening for the quiet footsteps of a dog still walking the woods, quietly carrying out a mission no one else could lift. And Casey knew this journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Ivy's words echoed in Casey's mind like a whisper from an old flame. Kota never disappeared. He just waited for the right moment. In the small break room behind the clinic, A soft yellow lamp cast light onto the teacup on the table. Outside, the rain had long since stopped, leaving the ground soaked and the sky smudged like a spill of ink. The rain might have passed, but the memories it brought still dripped quietly at the bottom of the heart. Ivy picked up the photo in her hand. An old, blurred shot. In it was a young man in a firefighter's suit, holding a dark, furred German shepherd close, his eyes bright, chest proud. Behind them stood an old firehouse, the American flag fluttering above. Their faces, man and dog, carried the same expression. Total readiness, no doubt, no hesitation. An unbroken trust. "He was the best I ever worked with," Ivy said, tracing the photo's edge. Travis Holt, youngest firefighter deployed to the Ridge Fire that year. But what made him different wasn't just skill. It was the bond with Kota. They didn't need signals, just a look. Casey was silent, each word settling like warm embers. Ivy lowered the photo. Her voice softer, almost a confession. Travis once said Kota could tell a baby's cry in a fire. Not by the volume, but by the intensity of the desperation. He said Kota would react in less than 10 seconds. No command, no call needed. "So was June the 1st?" Casey asked quietly, though she already knew the answer. Ivy shook her head, her gaze distant. "No, they saved 2 children before. One was trapped in a gas storage room. Kota scented the gas line and Travis broke the wall. The baby lived. The second was forgotten in a bathroom. Kota scratched at the door until his paws bled. That baby survived too." The story might have ended there, but then the air grew heavy, as if some pain remained unnamed. "But then there was a third." Ivy paused. "A newborn girl. Her mother hid in the pantry, thinking she'd taken the baby. But she hadn't. The child was left lying on the wooden floor by the window. By the time we arrived, the flames had taken everything." A suffocating silence. Casey felt her hands go cold despite the room's warmth. "Kota found her first," Ivy continued, voice cracking. "He sat beside her, wouldn't move, wouldn't bark, wouldn't howl. Just a low whine, like a plea no one heard. We pulled Travis out of the collapsed house, but it took 3 days to find Kota again. He was still there, beside the child's body. No eating, no drinking, eyes open, as if punishing himself." Casey swallowed hard. In her mind was the image of a lone dog, sitting in ashes, among burned wreckage and hot wind, keeping watch over a life already gone, as if guarding a nameless grave. "How long after that did Travis die?" she asked, uncertain. 3 weeks, Ivy answered, her eyes flickering with old pain. "Another fire. He saved 2 people trapped in a mountain station. But as he was leaving, the roof collapsed. Kota was outside. He saw it all." Casey could feel in every word that this was not just a story, but an unspoken farewell that had never been resolved. Kota lost Travis, lost a child he couldn't save, and lost his place in the human world because no one understood a dog could carry trauma like a person. After the funeral, "Kota disappeared," Ivy whispered, her eyes shining. "No one could keep him. They say he wandered the mountain roads, sometimes appearing and vanishing like a ghost. But I think he was just searching for another cry, a second chance." And now, in those flooded woods, when June, a nameless child, fell into silence in the rain, Kota heard. Not just with ears, but with instinct, memory, a heart once broken that had found a reason to beat again. Casey turned away, hiding her red eyes. She was not one to cry easily. But today, what choked her was not sorrow, but a deep, silent respect for a creature who needed no words, no glory, no justice. Kota didn't need praise. He just needed to keep fulfilling the mission his heart had never let go of. After a windless afternoon at the clinic, with memories of the fire and Kota's story still lingering like unspent ashes in her heart, Casey felt she couldn't sit still any longer. Something stirred inside her, almost like a voiceless call, compelling her to go back to where it all began. Not just for answers, but to understand more deeply the path Kota had taken, that strange instinct no one could ever teach. Colin Barrett's police cruiser quietly turned onto the waterlogged dirt road, its tires winding through the soft mud still imprinted with the rain from the night before. Ivy Lang sat in the back, her hand still gripping the old photo of Travis and Coda, her eyes gazing out the window as if tracing distant memories caught on tree bark and tufts of grass. They said little along the way. Each person was lost in their thoughts, as if following a silent trail in their own heart. Outside, the sky was pale, a thin mist clinging to the treetops, the scent of wet earth making the air heavy and oddly dense. When they arrived, Casey was the first to get out. She walked quietly across the marshy grass, each step careful, as if afraid to break whatever fragile remnants were left from that strange night. Before them was a small depression at the edge of the forest, where the previous night's heavy rain had turned everything into sticky mud. Now, as the water receded, strange patterns began to appear under the faint light. Colin gently lifted a piece of plastic sheeting, revealing a hollow in the ground, an oval-shaped pit, its walls packed firm, just deep enough for a newborn to lie snugly inside. Casey knelt, running her fingers over the drying mud, feeling the neat, parallel scratches lining the pit's walls. Not chaotic, not violent, just a strange, patient determination, as if the one who dug it had thought about the rising water, the creeping cold, and had done everything possible to keep the place dry. Ivy watched silently, her voice soft. It's dug by hand, not by nature. Coda used his paws to clear away the earth, roots, then built up the sides to block the water. Without this pit, just one more rain, and the baby would have been completely submerged. Colin crouched next to her, handing Casey a small evidence bag. Inside, a scrap of canvas, a pink yarn thread, and a bit of old plastic, all mud-stained, but unmistakably parts of the baby carrier they had found. Together they checked the surroundings. Quickly, Ivy spotted a trail of mixed footprints in the soft mud. She followed each indent, eyes narrowed as if reading a secret map only she could understand. "These dog prints," she pointed. "They're Coda's. Look at the paw marks, round, deep even, not like any wolf or coyote. Only a dog walks like this." Casey bent closer, gazing at the round, wet tracks left behind, her heart tightening with emotion. Coda didn't leave this place, not for hours, maybe all night. Colin, tracing the edge of the pit, suddenly spoke up. "Over here. Intermixed with the dog's tracks are the faint lines of a small wheel. Must be a folding stroller. The wobbly line leads from the road right up to the pit, then vanishes." Ivy nodded, her eyes somber. Maybe the baby was placed in the stroller, got lost or left behind in the storm, or someone abandoned her. But Coda, instead of leaving, followed the stroller tracks into the woods, found the child, and stayed. A long silence followed. Not of doubt, but pure admiration. Casey looked around and realized all the evidence pointed to one truth. Coda didn't just lead the way. He saved the child from the very start, with nothing but instinct, memory, and a loyalty no one could truly understand. She touched the pit's edge, feeling the firm earth beneath her fingertips, and in that moment she was filled with a gratitude both aching and beautiful. Ivy placed a hand on Casey's shoulder and whispered, "Sometimes, just one creature willing to look back, willing to keep a promise, is enough to change the future for a human life." Coda did what no one ever expected a dog could do. On the cold ground, Coda's footprints, unnoticed and unrewarded, remained, as if the memory of the old fire had never cooled. And there, in the silent wild, 3 people bowed their heads to the simplest loyalty on earth. A footprint, a scar from the past, a new life begun. As twilight crept through the Greystone forest, the 3, Casey, Ivy, and Colin, still stood in silence by Coda's tracks, each feeling something incomplete swelling quietly inside. The distant call of forest birds faded into the damp wind, leaving only breath and anxious heartbeats for those haunted by survival and restless souls. Just then, A cane tapped softly on a stone at the forest's edge, and a quiet figure emerged. An old man, his faded gray coat dusted with earth, his hair and beard blending into a single billowing cloud, his face tough and deeply lined by wind and time. It was Samuel Wicks, who lived alone in the old cabin at the forest's edge, part of the landscape, like a weathered tree. He stopped a few steps away, cautious but unafraid, his sharp eyes those of a man who had lived many years with nature and noticed every change in the wild world. "Sorry, I heard you folks," Samuel began, his voice rough and low, like someone unused to conversation after months of solitude in the woods. Colin nodded, politely explaining why they were there. When he mentioned the baby and the strange dog that had saved her, Samuel was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd long suspected. "You're right. That dog? Kota? I know him," he said, looking toward the darkening woods where the last sunlight glimmered on the tallest trees. "I've seen him many times, but not as a stray scavenger. More like a ghost haunting these woods." Ivy stepped forward, asking softly, "Did you ever pay attention to his tracks, Samuel?" Samuel looked at her and nodded firmly. "I was a soldier once, a tracker for years. Wolves, bears, even lynx. I know the difference. But Kota's paw prints are like no animals. He always walks alone, the prints steady, straight. And strangest of all, every time he shows up, the tracks never head deep into the forest or out to the highway. They always turn back toward the old fire line, where the big fire ended." A chill ran down Casey's spine. "You're sure it's the same dog? Maybe he's just wandering, looking for shelter?" Samuel shook his head, eyes glinting with the certainty of the experienced. "No, I've followed his tracks all winter, once over a mile. He avoids people, never goes near the livestock camps. But the strangest thing—" He bent down, picking up a stick and drawing a line in the muddy earth. "Whenever a storm is coming or there's word of an accident in the mountains, his tracks always show up, always stretching toward the old burn scar." Colin jotted down Samuel's words, never taking his eyes off the darkening forest edge. "So you think he's still searching for something out there?" Samuel was thoughtful, as if listening to his memories. "I think Kota hasn't left these woods because he still has a mission. Maybe he's waiting for someone. Or maybe he still believes someone will need him at the place where he lost everything." Ivy whispered, her hand gently touching her collar, where Kota's scorched badge hung. For a K9 who's saved lives, the memory of failure, of death, of separation never leaves. Maybe every time he returns to the old fire line, he's reliving what he and Travis never finished. Casey suddenly felt the world had become fragile. Quiet paw prints, endless rainy nights, unresolved sorrow, all weaving a solitary journey where only Kota knew the real reason he kept walking, quietly guarding the forest as a promise not yet forgiven. Samuel stepped back, his old eyes softening. "You might not believe it, but I've heard it. Even in stormy nights, the soft howl from the burned forest, like he's calling for someone, missing someone." The three fell silent. In that moment, Casey understood, more deeply than ever. In a world that seemed only ruins, there remained a creature who refused to leave. Not because he couldn't, but because, deep inside, where the old scars still hadn't healed, his mission was not yet done. And out there, where dusk fell over the woods, she seemed to glimpse in the flickering light the silhouette of a lone German shepherd, quietly turning, then moving on toward the fire's scar, carrying memory, love, and the silent hope of a soul that would never surrender. Evening shadows stretched across Greystone Forest, fading into the rain-soaked earth as Casey and Ivy left the scene, both weighed down by unspoken questions about the invisible thread connecting Kota, baby June, and the old fire's past. The wind, carrying the scent of fresh earth and decaying leaves, slipped through hair and sleeves, making every step quieter. They returned to the small town clinic where everything had begun, where, thanks to a dog's perseverance, baby June had crossed the fragile border between life and death. The clinic lights were still on, a gentle yellow spilling onto the leaf-strewn yard. Inside, Dr. Ellen Wexley was checking June's vital signs again. The little girl, bundled in Ellen's arms, was pink-cheeked and livelier than on that first blue-lipped day. Tiny fingers moved softly along the blanket's edge, lashes fluttering as she greeted a new world with warm, peaceful breaths. Casey stood nearby, feeling a relief that reached deep into her soul, as if witnessing a miracle both simple and extraordinary. The room still held traces of rain and antiseptic, the soft sounds, heartbeat monitors, June's sleepy hiccups, weaving together a gentle soundtrack of survival. "She's going to be all right," Ellen announced gently, smoothing the blanket, her eyes bright with joy she couldn't hide. "No internal injuries, temperatures back to safe levels. It's truly a miracle, especially for a baby who went through cold rain and hunger for so many hours." Ivy sat close, carefully jotting down every number. "Any news from social services?" she asked quietly, eyes never leaving June's face, a face both unfamiliar and strangely fated. Casey nodded softly, pulling out her phone. She'd just received an email from the county social services office. They had identified June thanks to the plastic hospital band on her wrist. Casey read slowly, letting each word settle into the room's heavy silence. Full name: June Monroe. Date of birth: 7 weeks ago at Missoula Hospital. Mother: Kelsey Monroe. No father listed. A short message, but one that held a story no one in that room had ever known. Casey continued with the social worker's report, handwriting slightly rushed, the words shaped by urgency. Mother: Kelsey Monroe, reported her baby missing 2 days ago. She'd left the baby at home with a close friend so she could work a night shift during the heavy rain. When she returned, the house was empty. Police found the friend's car. Trish Warren had slipped off the road and crashed near Monroe Bridge. The friend died at the scene. June wasn't in the car, and it's believed she left the scene before police arrived. As Casey read, Ellen looked up, her eyes full of emotion and worry. So no one meant to abandon her? It was an accident. Ivy squeezed Casey's hand and nodded. A mother's intuition is never wrong. Sometimes pain isn't caused on purpose, but is just the result of life's stacked misfortunes. Colin entered, carrying a fresh police report. His voice was quick, still tired from sleepless nights spent with sad cases. Investigation confirms Trish Warren died in the car, about a mile from the site. June doesn't appear on any traffic camera after the crash. The stroller tracks in the woods match the type Trish brought from Kelsey's house. Most likely the stroller rolled away from the scene because of the slope and heavy rain, got stuck at the edge of the woods, and June was left alone in the downpour. If not for Kota, she wouldn't have survived. The room fell silent, each person imagining June's lonely, cold, dangerous journey through the rainy woods, facing death in absolute silence, with only Kota able to hear her faint cries. Casey turned toward the window, where raindrops still clung to the glass. The image of Kota, the dog no one knew how many lost nights he'd survived, how many times he'd chosen to become the rescue ghost for the forgotten, rose again in her mind, a red thread running through the fate of June and so many others. "I don't think Kota just led us to June," Casey whispered, her eyes lost in the gray dusk. "He kept her alive, dug the nest, kept her warm, watched over her through the rainy night, every action shaped by the instinct and memory of a canine who'd known loss, separation, and never forgotten his last mission." Ellen quietly looked at June, laying her hand gently on the little chest rising and falling. "Miracles," she said softly, "don't always fall from the sky. Sometimes a dog's perseverance and unresolved love are enough to turn fate." Ivy nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Maybe this is how Travis, the old soul, sends his last message to the world. Even if everything disappears in fire, something good can still be saved, by the loyalty of a creature that never stopped believing in people. As the clinic's warm light blended into the night, June slept on, never knowing that somewhere outside, deep in the woods, a German shepherd quietly turned toward the glow, as if his mission, and those of all silent souls, had finally touched the edge of redemption. And Casey understood. The story of June, Kota, Travis, and their unfinished losses would go on, because some miracles aren't held in divine hands, but in the heart of a dog the world thought it had forgotten. The story of June, of Kota, of the old fire spread through Greystone Hollow like a warm breeze after endless cold rain, while Casey, Ivy, and the others in the clinic still reeled from tracing fate's winding path. A message arrived on the phone. A single note that broke the room's heavy silence like a chord of hope. Kelsey Monroe, June's mother, was on her way, less than an hour away. Time slowed, stretching through every worried heartbeat and sigh. Dr. Ellen checked June's stats one last time, tucking the blanket around her. Ivy stood by the window, eyes fixed on the red dirt road, streaked with rain and glinting in the dying sun. Casey paced the room, wondering how to speak to the woman who'd lost her child under such cruel circumstances, how to put into words the miracle Kota had given them. The battered police car pulled up quietly outside the clinic. Kelsey Monroe appeared. Small, thin, and exhausted, hair hastily tied, face pale, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and endless waiting, uncertain if her child was alive or lost forever. She trembled as she stepped from the car, clutching her dark raincoat as if it held her last hope. When the door opened, no one needed to say anything. Every movement, every breath in the room seemed to pause and make space for this moment. Just mother and child. Kelsey saw June through the incubator glass and nearly collapsed, tears streaming down a face ravaged by suffering. Her legs were weak, barely able to hold her up, but her arms, those of a mother, were impossibly strong as she gathered her child close. There were no shouts, no accusations, just ragged breaths, sobs breaking free after too much silent pain. June, sensing the familiar warmth, blinked, her tiny mouth twitching in deep sleep. Casey, Ellen, Ivy, and Colin all stood back, eyes shining, not wanting to disturb this sacred reunion. Then, from the damp hallway, Kota appeared, fur slick with rain, moving with a quiet gravity, his deep eyes reflecting memories that went beyond any animal's instinct. Kota didn't rush, didn't bark. He simply walked to Kelsey and June, stopping just under the weak slant of light from the door. Kelsey looked up, seeing the dog through her sobs. She knelt low, still holding her daughter, and laid a trembling hand on Kota's head. In that moment, all noise vanished. There was only that gentle touch between a mother who had found her child and a soul who had watched over the most precious thing with wordless devotion and loyalty. Kota stood motionless, neither moving away nor seeking comfort. His silence was the answer to everything. His eyes, deep and sorrowful, glimmered with something almost like understanding, empathy that crossed all lines between human and animal. Kelsey whispered, voice hoarse but clear in the room, filled now only with breath. "I know it was you who kept her safe. Thank you, Kota." A tear slipped down Kelsey's cheek, landing on Kota's thick fur. The dog didn't lick it away, didn't whine, didn't move closer. He just stayed, still as a soldier who'd finally finished his long, silent mission. Ivy stepped closer, kneeling gently, placing her hand on Kelsey's shoulder. "You know, Kota never forgot who he was. He's watched over other children, sat with loss that had no name. Maybe today, with you and June, he found the final meaning for his lonely journey." Kelsey hugged June to her chest, a weary but radiant joy lighting her face. She looked at Kota, her thanks unspoken, the kind of gratitude only those who owe their lives can ever truly know. "Maybe you're not a miracle, Kota, but you're the reason I can still believe they exist." In the corner, Casey let out a quiet breath. She glanced at Ivy, saw the glistening eyes of a woman who'd seen so much, then looked back at Kota, recognizing in his steady posture all the beauty and sorrow that loyalty can carry. As night fell on Greystone Hollow, and only the gentle patter of rain on the roof and Kota's shadow slipping quietly into the dark woods remained, Casey knew, sometimes a silent reunion says more than words ever could, and this dog, with his steadfast devotion, had restored hope, returned warmth, and lit the way home for two souls who had been lost in destiny's storm. The night of reunion had passed, but its echoes lingered in every corner of Greystone Hollow's little clinic. The warmth of a mother's embrace, Kota's steadfast silence, the tear-filled eyes of those who had witnessed it all, these seemed to hover in the small room, mixing with the rain that still hadn't quite stopped outside. Yet just as it seemed everything had settled, something strange began to take root in the fragile peace they had found. June was moved back to the special care room after the reunion. Kelsey stayed beside her all night, thin hands gently stroking the fine wisps of baby hair, her gaze never leaving the slightest movement her daughter made. Just outside the glass door, Kota lay curled up, back turned to the rain, head resting on his front paws, ears flicking every time June shifted or made a faint sound in her sleep. Even in sleep, in the coldest hours, the old dog would not abandon his post, guarding the little girl who'd returned from the edge. On a misty morning, as Casey returned to the clinic after a restless night, she immediately sensed something was off. Dr. Ellen Wexley was standing by June's crib, her brow furrowed with a look that was half confusion, half concern. The heart monitor by the baby's bassinet emitted rapid, high, erratic tones, a sound tapping at the walls of worry that hadn't yet settled since June was rescued. "Kelsey, did she cry much last night?" Casey asked softly, moving closer to the crib. Kelsey shook her head, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "No, she just fidgeted but didn't cry. I think she's tired, still just waking up." Dr. Ellen adjusted the equipment, eyes fixed on the constantly shifting numbers blinking on the screen. "What's strange is that whenever Kota leaves the door, even for just 10 minutes, her heart rate spikes, arrhythmia sets in, her oxygen levels get unstable. But as soon as Kota reappears, even just lying quietly outside the glass, everything goes back to normal. Steady, almost miraculously regular." Colin entered with a cup of coffee, frowning as he listened to Ellen's explanation. "You mean she's become dependent on Kota?" Ellen shook her head slightly, lips pursed as she weighed her words. "Not exactly dependent. In medicine, we call this biological imprinting, a kind of natural bond formed in a life or death situation, especially when the baby is too young to distinguish emotional boundaries with the outside world. But this case is unlike anything I've ever read or seen. The imprint isn't with her mother, but with a dog. A canine who's lived through loss upon loss. June has chosen Kota as her first shield, her safest breath." Ivy stood quietly by the window, gazing at the pale gray sky. In her eyes was the long journey she'd witnessed, the understanding that some wounded souls can only be healed by the silent presence of a loyal animal. Casey was silent. The image of Kota resting his head on the glass, eyes brightening every time June stirred, played in her mind over and over. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a blind miracle, but something deeper, a connection that went beyond words or textbook science. Just then, June stirred, her chubby face scrunching in a fleeting dream. As if awakened by that tiny sound, Kota lifted his head, moving closer, just a fraction from the edge of the glass. In an instant, the erratic beeps from the monitor quieted, numbers on the screen stabilizing, each heartbeat returning to the rhythm of peace June needed most. Kelsey held her breath, watching her daughter, then looking at Kota with boundless gratitude. Maybe for June, Kota is the first breath she recognized in the storm. Without him, she wouldn't be here today. Ellen carefully noted every observation, her eyes alive with the humility of a scientist facing the unexplainable and the thrill of new knowledge. We still don't understand the silent language between animals and children. But one thing is clear. June's heart chose her protector. Not by reason, but by the deepest survival instinct. Colin mused, the coffee in his hand long since gone cold. It's as if Kota and June were born to fill the emptiness in each other that adults can never reach. One had lost all hope, the other started life in fear. Ivy smiled gently, sat on the floor beside Kota, and stroked his back. Kota closed his eyes, sighed, and wagged his tail softly. For a moment the whole room was wrapped in gentle silence, a space filled only with steady heartbeats, soft breaths, and the invisible thread connecting two lives that nearly missed each other in the wild storm. That night, Casey sat for a long time by the special care window, eyes fixed on Kota as he kept watch over June's sleep. Outside, rain began to fall again. But inside, every heartbeat, every breath had found its answer. Dr. Ellen recorded in her medical journal, "Unexpected biological imprint, a retired rescue dog and a newborn." In this miracle, every bit of magic lies in wordless loyalty, unconditional love, and the power to heal that surpasses medicine. In the days after the reunion, it seemed peace had returned to Greystone Hollow, where an old dog and a newborn survived the historic storm together. But as June thrived each day, healing miraculously under her mother's and Kota's protection, everyone began to realize. Not all miracles are complete, and not every wound is easily healed, especially those buried deep under fur, quietly aching from a fire long past. Since the night of reunion, Kota rarely left the special care room. Even though the rain had stopped and sunlight sometimes fell golden on the clinic lawn, the dog stayed close to June, as if every second near her was precious time he could not bear to lose again. And then, the first signs of trouble appeared, his steps slowing, pausing in the hallway just to catch his breath or quickly lick at a back paw. Casey noticed the change first. One morning, bringing Kota's food to the porch, she saw he didn't come running as usual, just looked up at her, those quiet, sad but resolute eyes, then struggled to rise, hind legs trembling, limping with each step. When his paw touched the concrete, Casey heard a low whimper, as if each movement made an old wound bite deeper into a body already worn out. Not hesitating, Casey called Dr. Ellen and Ivy. Under the soft yellow light, the three of them knelt to carefully examine Kota's right hind leg, where the fur had been scorched years ago in the ridge fire, now raw, red, and faintly smelling of infection. Ellen gently touched the scar, parting fur matted with pus and dried blood. "This burn is deeper than I thought," she said, her voice heavy. "Beneath the skin, the tissue has been dead for a long time, and now there are signs of serious infection. If we don't act soon, it will spread fast and there'll be nothing we can do." Kelsey sat close by, June in her arms, eyes anxiously fixed on Kota. "Is there anything you can do, doctor?" Ellen shook her head slowly, voice quiet. "There are only two options. One is to operate, remove the dead tissue, maybe even a small part of the leg. Kota will suffer, need anesthesia, and have a long recovery. If the surgery succeeds, he might have a few more years, but there's no guarantee he'll run and play with June again." The room was silent, broken only by Kota's labored breathing, June's steady monitor, and the soft patter of rain outside, like small fingers tapping the roof. Ivy laid a hand on Casey's head, her gaze gentle but resolute. "And the second option?" Ellen looked at Kota, eyes wet as a mother losing a child. "If we let nature take its course, with only painkillers and loving care, Kota can live out his days peacefully by June. No more pain, no more surgery. But it won't be long. Maybe a few months, maybe only weeks." Casey sat down beside Kota, cradling the old, feverish dog. His eyes no longer shone with pride, but with exhaustion, utterly at peace, surrounded by those who loved and trusted him. Casey realized this decision wasn't just a pet owner's. It was a final promise between souls who'd crossed loss, life, death, and hope together. She looked at Kota for a long moment, then whispered, "If it were me, I'd want to live every second with those I love, even if it hurt. But Kota, you spent your whole life rescuing others, suffering losses people can't even imagine. I won't let you be afraid again. Not now." Kelsey laid June on the blanket beside Kota, letting the tiny hand brush the dog's aging fur. Strangely like a small miracle, June giggled, her hand grabbing at Kota's tail. As if understanding, the old dog tilted his head, eyes brightening with a last spark of warmth. Ivy said softly, as if afraid to break a fragile dream, "Sometimes the bravest thing isn't to keep fighting pain, but to let go when there is enough love. Kota will stay with June to the very end. That's the greatest gift, the warmest ending we can give him." Suddenly, Greystone Hollow brightened. The rain stopped, and gray clouds drifted from the valley. In the little clinic, everyone gathered. A dog, a baby, mothers, friends, each quietly sensing that some wounds never truly heal, but through love become the most beautiful scars in the memory of all who ever touched them. Casey pulled Kota's head into her lap, tears soaking into his old fur, whispering, "We'll be together until the very end." And Kota, breathing ragged but steady, nuzzled her chest, like a thank you, like a farewell that needed no words. After the final decision about Kota's fate was placed in the hands of those who loved him most, a sense of peace seemed to settle for a moment over Greystone Hollow. But that peace was fragile, mere surface, because the shadow of the past never truly sleeps under the ashes of old fires. That morning, though it wasn't raining, low clouds hung over the old pines, wrapping the small town in a gray shroud like a damp blanket not yet dry. Casey was just stepping out onto the porch with June in her arms, Kota lying quietly at her feet, soaking up a rare patch of sunlight, when the phone rang. Urgent, insistent, very unlike the usual calls in a quiet, rural place. Dr. Ellen picked up first. Her expression shifted from surprise to unease in just a few clipped sentences. Casey took the phone and heard a man's deep, cold voice, his words sharp and precise, more command than conversation. "This is Colonel Glenn Mathers, former chief of the Montana Fire Department. Under regulations regarding canine service animals, I'm ordering you to immediately surrender the dog named Kota to the authorities. He will be subject to reevaluation and custody review under federal standards." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Ivy shot to her feet, her usually calm, mountain wind face suddenly hard as flint. Colin entered from the door, catching the last words, his face storm dark. Casey kept her voice steady, though anger simmered beneath. "Colonel, Kota hasn't been under the department's care since the Ridge fire. He's been declared deceased in your records. We're only caring for an old, injured dog, and more than that, Kota just saved a child's life, reuniting her with her mother. Why do you want to take him?" There was a pause. When Mathers spoke again, his voice was colder still, mechanical, almost cruel. "This isn't just the concern of a small town. After the Ridge fire, Kota was listed for removal due to uncontrolled behavior at the scene, which led to an additional casualty. Per initial orders, the dog was to be euthanized, but then disappeared. No one could find him. Now he's resurfaced. I can't let personal feelings override public safety. I repeat, Kota must be surrendered for evaluation and canine behavioral review before any further decision is made." Ivy fell silent, her hand gripping Kota's charred badge around his neck. In her eyes, anger and sorrow mixed, like the old fire's history had come back not as ghosts of the dead, but in the fate of a creature who had never been forgiven. Colin hit speakerphone, speaking each word clearly. "Colonel Mathers, this is Flathead County Police. I confirm Kota is not a danger to anyone. The entire town knows he's saved many lives, and if you remember, Kota was the last creature to leave the fire line, only because he refused to abandon his fallen teammate." There was a short silence. Mathers replied, his voice now tinged with fatigue. "That is exactly why I ordered him removed, Officer Barrett. Kota refused to withdraw, fought to return to danger. I can't let feelings override discipline. But if you insist on defiance, I will send animal control to Greystone Hollow tomorrow. You have exactly 24 hours to prepare." When the call ended, the room felt even heavier. Kelsey sank into a chair, clutching June, her eyes hollow, like every miracle they'd glimpsed was now threatened with erasure. Ivy's voice trembled. "He's the one who signed Coda's death order after the fire. He's never forgiven. Not Travis, not Coda, not anyone who broke protocol." Casey knelt beside Coda, feeling the dog's slow, heavy breaths as he lowered his head into her lap. She knew what Coda had endured was more than a scar on his leg. It was a wound deep in his heart, an invisible sentence always waiting for final judgment. Outside, the rain started again. This time, no one thought of miracles. Each person quietly prepared for a new battle, not just to protect a dog, but to reclaim justice for a past never truly forgiven. The arrival of the order to seize Coda had cast a shadow over every heart in Greystone Hollow. Everyone tried to find a way to stop the cold-hearted directive, but no one knew what evidence could defend an old dog against the iron regulations of the organization and the haunted memory of his former commander. Casey, driven by an unexplainable urge, as if guided by an old whisper, decided to return to the old firehouse, where Travis and Coda had spent their last years together before the fateful blaze. The little house behind the fire station was covered in moss, windows blurred with dust, but inside, everything was still as if Travis had only stepped out for a moment. Casey walked down the narrow hall, yellow light streaming through old glass onto the cold tile. Her hand skimmed over dusty bookshelves, lockers labeled with the names of every crew member, until she stopped at a small drawer marked K9 Files, Holt Coda. Inside, she found an old recorder, matte black, its buttons worn smooth with time. Nerves and anticipation surged in her as she pressed play, and the faint hiss opened up old memories saved in sound. First, a soft noise. Travis's gentle laugh, his voice low but warm. "Fireteam log, day I don't remember what day. This is Travis Holt. If you found this recorder, I'm sick of the dry reports. I want to say something real about Coda, the K9 everyone calls uncontrollable." You could hear Coda barking softly in the background, his panting breath, and the scratch of claws on the floor. "This dog is nothing like any I've trained. Coda's not just good at finding people in smoke. He's got, call it, a sixth sense if you want. He knows who's scared, who's desperate, and who needs rescuing first. I used to doubt it until I saw it. In the chaos, in the smoke and crying, Coda only takes a few seconds to lock onto a child, even if they're not crying, even if everyone else is panicking." There was a pause. Then Travis's voice turned softer, slower. "I know to the higher-ups Coda is a stubborn K9. Twice he's refused to leave a scene when I called, but that's not his fault. If you've ever lost a teammate, ever known what it feels like to miss saving a life, you'd understand. Coda doesn't give up, whether it's for a human or some lost soul trapped inside." Travis's voice caught, then a long, heavy sigh. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring. The fire last night was huge. I was scared. But if I don't make it back, if something happens to me, I only have one request. Don't make Coda choose between orders and his instincts. Let him decide his path. He deserves that much." The recorder ended with a soft beep, then only the faint static of old tapes. Casey sank onto the wooden chair, eyes closed, letting Travis's words soak into the deepest parts of her heart. She realized that all the accusations, all the paperwork and orders, meant nothing compared to this simple truth. Coda was a soul who knew love, who knew how to do what was right, no matter what boundaries humans tried to draw. When Casey returned to the clinic, the recorder in her hand, she felt a flicker of light in the storm. No matter what legal system or cold orders lay ahead, the last words of Travis, the one who lived and died with Coda, were the strongest testimony. No one had the right to decide for a being who gave his whole life to protect life and kindness. And in the corner, Coda lay quietly beside June, not knowing that somewhere an old voice had just protected him one more time, beyond death, beyond every line drawn between humans and animals. After the night Casey returned holding the recorder, the atmosphere in Greystone Hollow changed in a quiet but profound way. Within hours, news of the order to seize Kota had spread throughout Red Elk. Unprompted, small groups began to gather outside the clinic. Some brought home-cooked food, some held up hand-painted signs saying, "Let Kota stay," and even children brought their puppies to wait with the crowd under the eaves. The gratitude built up over the years, from all the rescues, stormy nights, and the silent moments when only an old dog's breath could be heard, suddenly surged like a powerful wave through the normally peaceful valley. The very next day, Casey, Ivy, and Dr. Ellen received an urgent invitation from the town committee. Meeting at Red Elk Hall to discuss Kota, his right to live, the right to choose for a rescue soul. That afternoon, the little town hall was full of the sound of rain and the glow of warm lights. Casey sat in the front row, facing a familiar crowd. People whose eyes had seen sacrifice, who had been comforted in loss by Kota's silent loyalty. Ivy quietly carried Kota's scorched badge, while Dr. Ellen clutched the medical file with all the data on June's survival miracle. The chair of the meeting, Mayor Shelley Pratt, opened with a gentle rap of her gavel, her gaze both stern and deeply moved. Today, we're not just here to talk about regulations, but about a piece of memory, a piece of the conscience of this town. Our decision tonight will send a message to every future generation. Is Red Elk still a place where people and animals have the right to protect each other? Silence fell as Casey stood, took Travis's recorder from her coat pocket, and placed it on the table in the center of the hall. She looked directly at everyone, her voice steady, her eyes clear as mountain water. I wasn't born in Red Elk, but I've witnessed its miracle, and that miracle took the form of an old canine dog abandoned by history, Casey began. Some ask, why should we defend Kota when orders from above are so clear? I can only answer with what Kota's friend, firefighter Travis Holt, left behind. She pressed play. Travis's voice filled the room, honest, humble, blending pride and pain. His words about Kota's instincts and loyalty, more valuable than anything money could buy, resonated in every heart. And finally, the last line, his plea that choked everyone who heard it. If I don't come back, let Kota choose his path. A sob broke out at the back. A gray-haired man once led out of a burning house by Kota, then the sniffles of a child in her mother's lap, never taking her eyes off the recorder still humming with the warmth of memory. Ivy stood, her voice deep and strong as an old pine. Travis never abandoned Kota. Neither should we. A soul that once saved this entire town cannot be weighed like a cold, lifeless object. Dr. Ellen added her detailed report, how June's heartbeat only stabilized when Kota was near, how there had never been evidence of Kota endangering anyone, and in fact, how he was the only lifeline that pulled a child back from the edge of death. Mayor Shelley bowed her head, then looked each person in the eye. We'll send this recording, all the medical data, and hundreds of Red Elk testimonials to the authorities. On behalf of the town, I petition for the seizure order to be revoked, and for Kota to be recognized as an honorary member of our community. Applause erupted, swelling to cheers. That night, though the rain hadn't stopped, Red Elk Hall was as bright as a festival, a place where every heart chose to believe in loyalty, and in the good things only dogs like Kota can teach us. And the seizure order, before the force of memory, kindness, and the resolve of a small town, was revoked that very night. Kota stayed, not just as a dog, but as a symbol of Red Elk. We do not abandon those who once saved us. After that emotional meeting, as applause and quiet promises faded into the rainy night, something had changed in Red Elk. It was as if everyone, young and old, carried a silent gratitude and a need to leave something for Kota, the old dog who had saved the town's soul with his quiet perseverance. No reminders were needed. Everyone knew it was time to create a lasting mark for him, not in words, but in a silent testament that would weather every storm of time. Within days, the town council and local carpenters quietly built a small memorial sign at the edge of the forest, where the rain had once washed away every trace, where Kota alone stood blocking the ambulance in the dark, his unblinking gaze holding all the hope a fragile life could cling to. The sign was made of seasoned pine, planed smooth, mounted on an old stone base, simple, sturdy, like Kota himself. Wildflowers bloomed beneath it, dew shining on every blade, the pale spring sun casting an amber glow across the wood. On the dedication afternoon, without any formal announcement, people just arrived. Ivy stood at the front, gray hair wild in the wind, eyes red, but not a single tear fell. Dr. Ellen held June in her arms, and Kelsey, newly released from days of fear and grief, gripped Casey's hand as if afraid the peace they'd finally touched might vanish. And Kota, though now slow and unsteady, made his way forward alone, stopping at the foot of the sign, looking up, his silver-streaked coat glinting in the evening sun. In his eyes was a distant calm, as if he understood everything, yet asked for nothing. Carved in the wood, by hand, not ornate but resounding as a message for all future generations who'd never known the rain that year. For the one who never left, even when no one called his name. Just 8 words, but everyone who passed by was moved to silence. It wasn't just for a dog, but for anyone who's known loneliness, loyalty, and has stood at the brink with no hand to call their own. When the ceremony ended, Kota lay there for a long time, head resting on the stone base, eyes toward the forest's edge, as if keeping watch forever over something greater than himself. One by one, children came to place wildflowers, whispering thanks into the breeze. Casey stood quietly, her hand on the carved words, knowing that some lives, some souls, become miracles for a whole community simply by keeping the promise never to abandon. And from that day on, every time the rain returned, new paw prints appeared in the wet earth beside the sign, a gentle reminder that loyalty and love remain in every hidden corner of this world. Since the memorial sign was placed at the edge of Red Elk Forest, time seemed to soften inside the little house where Kota, June, and those who loved them lived together. Each day, as the afternoon sun slanted through the window bars, Kelsey would carry June outside to let the baby touch the cool air, hear the forest birds chirping, and, most importantly, so that the first gaze of her life would always find the silhouette of the old dog by her side. Kota had slowed down noticeably. More patches of fur had turned white, his walk was heavy, and even breathing had grown harder each morning. Yet one thing never changed. Every night, no matter the weather, he would muster his strength to climb the steps to the bedroom, then quietly slip his body beneath the crib where June slept. No one needed to call him, no one needed to remind him. It was a habit deeper than instinct, a mission of the heart. On April nights, when the rain came with thunder, lightning flashed across the old wooden ceiling. Casey and Kelsey often worried Kota might panic. He had, in the past, woken suddenly in storms, ears up, eyes shining with silent anxiety, only calming when June reached out to grasp a handful of soft fur. But that night, a long, rainy night with thunder rolling over the forest, was strangely peaceful. June slept deeply, her breath steady, a tiny hand holding a crib bar. Kota, for the first time after so many years standing watch for others, also rested his head, letting his old body relax beneath the crib. Outside, wind howled, rain hammered the eaves, thunder rattled the window, but Kota did not stir, did not tremble, did not wake at every gust. In that unusually deep sleep, Kota's aged face seemed to soften. His lips twitched, almost a smile, his hind legs, usually aching, gently flexed, as if running toward something familiar. Casey stood by the doorway, holding her breath, eyes blurring with both sorrow and gratitude. After all the years of fire and rain, Kota finally had a night truly for himself, a night of real peace. And perhaps in his dreams, Kota returned to where the most beloved voices awaited, where Travis and the souls he had once saved were waiting. Or maybe, in the deepest sleep of his life, the old dog finally ran, without pain, without fear, across green fields where there was no fire, no orders, no more loneliness. In the crib, June smiled in her sleep, tiny fingers stretched down as if searching for something in the faint yellow glow. No one knew, in that quiet room, that the bond between two souls battered by storms had reached a new peaceful realm, where only those who never leave truly find rest in love. That night, rain still fell outside the forest, but in the little house there was only steady breathing, gentle dreams, and an old dog, for the first time, daring to sleep deeply beneath the crib of the child he had chosen to love until the very end. The next morning, as sunlight finally slipped gently through Red Elk's clouds, Casey sat quietly for a long time by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. She watched June, still fast asleep, and Kota curled up underneath, still breathing evenly, the old body bearing traces of last night's storm. But on Kota's face, at the corner of his mouth and behind closed eyes, there was a tranquility that hadn't been seen in years. Witnessing that, Casey felt a persistent urge in her heart. This story shouldn't be forgotten, shouldn't just belong to her, Kelsey, or Red Elk. Kota, with his loyal gaze and the years he never left anyone behind, deserved to have his miracle told to the world, to show what simple, steadfast love truly means. So that morning, as June was waking, Casey opened an old notebook and began to write down everything, from the first rainy night when the ambulance was stopped by Kota's strange eyes, to the rescue of June, to the turns of fate that nearly stole all hope, to those rare, peaceful nights by the little crib where an old dog kept his promise never to let go, never to leave. She named the story, The Dog That Won't Let Go. She didn't just record events, she poured into every line her gratitude and wonder for Kota, telling of the times he silently saved people, of the painful past he and Travis endured, of the choice to stay with June even when his body was worn out. She didn't hide the nights Kota shuddered in nightmares, nor skip the days the town stood together to protect him from the cold order to take him away. Every detail was a silent pause, proof of loyalty enduring every test of time. When Casey posted the story on the Red Elk community page and sent it to local newspapers, no one expected that within just 2 days, The Dog That Won't Let Go would spread across the western towns of America. Hundreds, then thousands, of people shared the story, each adding their memories of Kota. He led me out of a flooded road last year. I once saw that dog at Monroe Bridge, standing guard while the kids crossed. In 2020, I met Kota in the woods. He gave me faith that there are still good things in the world. Casey's inbox overflowed with letters, emails, and old photos of Kota beside babies, the elderly, and retired firefighters. Someone sent a trembling thank you note. If not for him, I'd never have seen my granddaughter again. Children drew Kota standing in the rain, paw prints stamped on Red Elk's red soil. Those journal pages became a quiet epic of patience, forgiveness, and the healing power of animals. Kota, the dog who wouldn't let go, had crossed every boundary. He became a symbol of kindness, proof that as long as we don't let go, good things are strong enough to survive a turbulent world. And as Casey read each story sent back, she realized, Kota's miracle was never a sudden burst, but a quiet persistence through the days. Thanks to this journal, his miracle was no longer invisible. It touched, moved, and connected hearts that thought they had lost faith in wonder. In the little room, among letters, drawings, and an emotion spreading through the town, Kota slept peacefully next to June, as if he knew his story had finally reached the place it belonged, the hearts of those who had once been lost in the storm, but had never been left behind. Winter withdrew from the Red Elk Valley as gently as a breath, leaving behind the first pale rays of sunlight glistening on grass still drenched in night dew. After so many days of storms, after weeks when it seemed all anyone could do was cling to a fragile miracle, spring knocked on the door once more, bringing with it the scent of fresh earth, tender leaves, and a quiet hope that seeped into every corner of the little house by the forest. At dawn, as the woodland birds began to sing, Casey stepped out onto the porch, gazing at the backyard where the first lush green was returning. Kelsey had fully moved into the little house behind the cabin, where the windows opened straight onto rolling grass, and the kitchen door was always ajar to welcome in spring breezes and morning light. Kelsey smiled more often now, a rare smile after so many months of turmoil, the hesitance and anxiety fading away. She hung old photos of her mother on the walls, lined children's books on the shelves, saving for June a world full of memory and love. As for June, the little girl who once hovered on the edge of loss, she could now crawl across the room on her own. Her soft hands explored the faded floral rug, her bright eyes taking in the world with endless wonder. Each time June crawled close to Kota's bed, she would burst out in pure laughter. That sound, her first laughter, clear as the first dew, was enough to melt the last icy remnants in the hearts of the adults around her. And, miraculously, even though Kota was visibly older, his fur grayer, his frame thinner, his movements slower and more hesitant, every time he heard June laugh, those old ears would twitch, then perk up, as if straining to catch every beat of happiness from the child he once saved. Whether dozing by the window or curled up in exhaustion by the crib, Kota would still awaken at the briefest peal of June's laughter, as if that strange bond between them had never faded with the changing seasons or the passage of time. One midday, with golden sunlight pouring over the steps, June crawled out into the garden for the first time. Kota mustered himself to stand, weak legs trembling, and walked closely beside her. The sight, a tired old dog quietly keeping watch, always close enough to shield June from the wind, always ready to steady her when she stumbled, made Casey stifle a sigh of gratitude and sorrow. When Ivy visited, she only smiled. Some bonds never change, no matter how many seasons pass. People from Red Elk would drop by as well, sometimes to leave a handful of wildflowers on the porch, bringing a cake, a word of congratulations. They whispered among themselves that with every spring, the village grew a little livelier, because good things were always nurtured by the smallest of miracles. Kelsey would sometimes sit by the window, watching June play with Kota, and softly murmur, "If it weren't for you, we'd never have seen this spring, Kota." Kota never replied. He only wagged his tail and pressed his head against June's leg, enough to make the little girl laugh and reach out to hug his now silvered fur. In the small house by the woods, old wounds quietly healed. And with every morning's awakening, every child's laugh, every gentle ear flick from Kota, spring, and faith in miracles was awakened again and again. Spring lingered on, filling Red Elk Valley with children's laughter, misty rain on new leaves, and sunlight spilling over the old shingled roofs. In the wooden house by the forest, everything kept changing quietly, day by day, adding new, simple yet profound memories, moments you'd think could only exist in dreams or bedtime stories. Some mornings, Casey still woke early to watch Kota doze under June's crib, the dog's eyes shining with things unspoken. Kelsey carefully prepared breakfast while June crawled excitedly around the room, always keeping Kota in sight. Each day, June grew a little more, her hair long enough now for a little ribbon, her plump hands reaching endlessly, her legs trying to stand, her mouth babbling the first sounds. Words not yet formed, but filled with the joy of being alive. During these months, Kota was no longer just a rescue dog. To the town, he was a symbol of unnamed kindness, proof that the smallest act could become a miracle. To Casey and Kelsey, Kota was a living memory, a piece of Travis, of those who once gave themselves for others, a silent example of patience and loyalty. Kota no longer took orders, needed no leash, wore no badge. His greatest mission now was not at the line between life and death, but in the quiet days beside the little girl he'd once saved from the storm of fate. In those days, June was no longer a frail child trembling on the edge of survival. She could crawl all through the yard, laughing aloud whenever she touched Kota's warm, shaggy fur. And each time Kota left her sight, June would reach out for him, her mouth forming sounds, as if calling for her closest family. Adults would joke, "Surely June will call Mama first." But in Casey and Kelsey's eyes shone a quiet awe. They knew that some bonds go straight to the heart, deeper than any ordinary name. And then, one afternoon, with sunlight angling across the wooden floor, June crawled over to Kota, grabbed his silver fur, her eyes shining with delight. She turned back to look at Kelsey, mouth open, lips pursed as if gathering all her life into a single sound. Amid soft encouragement, with Casey holding her breath on the porch, June spoke. Not Mama, not Papa, but a tiny, round, clear sound that rang through the sunny room. Kota. That call rang farther than words could reach, past all loss, heartbreak, and pain that had filled this little house. Kota, the old dog, lifted his head, ears alert, eyes shimmering with tears. Tired as he was, with few springs left ahead, he came over and nuzzled June's hand, answering that first call with all the love a loyal heart could give. Casey watched in silence, warm tears rising to her eyes. She knew that from today, all missions, all orders, all the tangled fate in Kota's life had become pure love, the kind Travis left behind for the world, echoing in that little voice. From then on, people would say, "If a dog once saves your life, the greatest miracle isn't just that he completed his duty. It's when he's answered with love, with a first call that means there's nothing left to regret in this lifetime." And in the small house by the woods, with spring outside, there was an old dog, no longer haunted by nightmares, no longer chasing old ghosts, just listening to the call of love from the life he'd never let go. Kota's story ends there, not with parting, but with an eternal beginning for every miracle born of loyalty and unconditional love. Maybe we've all heard stories of loyal dogs, of miracles in the friendship between people and animals, but the story of Kota and little June isn't just about loyalty. It is proof of the strength of love, forgiveness, and hope that quietly endures in every small heart. Kota showed us that sometimes the miracle isn't in extraordinary deeds, but in simply choosing never to let go. Even in the storm, even when no one calls your name. Has a dog ever changed your life? Or have you ever witnessed a miracle from a small animal? Share your story in the comments, because your experience might inspire someone out there who still needs a reason to keep going. If you were moved by Kota's journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help us spread more of these miracles between people and animals. Thank you for staying with this story, and may you always believe that good things will return as long as we never let go.